everybody. Hope you're having a wonderful Friday. We are going to be talking about everything Section 8 today, understanding the secrets of unaffordable housing. One of the things I love about Section 8 is its longevity with tenancy. And I'm going to touch on that today, but I've been working with Section 8 tenants for my entire career. And there's kind of a stigma about working with Section 8. And what I find is that landlords either love it or they hate it. And in reality, it's a lot like any other tenancy. There's just a few differences, but we're going to talk about the process for doing it, the approval process, and what varies in the leases. So before I get started, I want to thank everybody for coming to our meetup yesterday. It was absolutely fantastic. We had a great time. And if you didn't get to come, I encourage you to come next month. We're doing these every month in DFW. And it was just a great time getting together, chatting. They're free to attend and just getting to talk with other like-minded investors, learn about their journey, and learn from other experts in the real estate industry through conversation. So that next one's going to be in November. If you want to stay up to date on when that's going to be, you can scan this QR code here, or of course you can go to slaughterinvesting.com or wealthandrentals.com to register or just reach out to me. Next, we're going to have the top 10 mistakes in property management, how to maximize your rentals or find those who can help. That's going to be on November 19th, and that'll be airing at 12 p.m. or 8 p.m., depending on which works better for you. As always, you can visit our website to sign up for upcoming webinars and events, and you can use this QR code here as well. If you've missed any of our previous webinars, those are all up on our social channels, on our podcast channels, as well as YouTube. You can also join our mailing list to stay up to date. This is probably the easiest way, and you can scan this QR code here, or again, head over to our website. We're going to have our next property tour on November 8th, and that's going to be visiting our top markets with OmniKey Realty. If you haven't registered and done one of these yet, I absolutely recommend you do. For more information, you can reach out and we can get you the specifics on that. After that, we're going to have one on November 22nd and then finish out our year on December 6th. Those run from 10 to 4, and it is $50 per ticket. What we are working on right now is a new podcast I can't wait to share with you. So this is going to be launching in the next couple of weeks. This one is not going to be just real estate. So we're really excited about it. It's called Beyond the Balance Sheet, and keep an eye out for information. We've got a star-studded guest list coming on, and the whole purpose of this podcast is about building a wealthy life. And of course, that is about a whole lot more than financial wealth. So very excited to bring that to you. Keep your eye out for more information on that. Before I begin today, everything that I'm going to talk about is based on my best years of experience and judgment from being a real estate investor, owning and operating a real estate investment firm, and doing property management. I am one tool in your toolbox. My goal is to educate you and connect you with others on your journey who can help you as you divide kind of trying to decide what your best investment model is going to be and what's going to work the best for you. Of course, we believe our model is the best out there and we believe it's the right one, but it's just one of many. And the goal is for you to have as much information as possible so you are armed to decide that for yourself and educated to make decisions and make smart financial and real estate decisions. A couple little updates about market data. We had some amazing new numbers come out of Grayson County this month. We saw incredible median home price increase in the last year. These numbers are end of September 2024, and those numbers are up 14%. Absolutely incredible. And this is exactly the type of growth that we expect to see and expect to continue in Grayson County. For those of you who are unfamiliar, that is the area that has all of the chip manufacturing and huge growth happening with all of the things along Lake Texoma, with Texas Instruments and Globotech and IIVI, formerly Finisar. So just incredible stuff happening in Grayson County. We also held a huge chunk of the fastest growing cities in the United States. Salina was number 1, Royce City, Melissa, Princeton, Anna, and Forney. You'll notice a huge trend with these is that almost all of them are on the northern path that we love and absolutely believe in. And the other 2 are on the eastern path. That's the other half of the city that we sell. So really definitely an area that we recommend you keep an eye on, lots of potential, and of course, lots of growth. Around 1,000 people a day moving into Texas, and about half of those are coming to DFW. So let's get started on Section 8 Simplified. We're going to talk about the pros and cons to Section 8 rentals, the process of renting out Section 8, and the best practices. Now, one of the things that I want you to be aware of is how many people actually have Section 8, so how big a tenant pool this is. Most eligible households have 2 members on average, and 43% of those households are families with children. About 42% of households have a female head of household. So that's about 3 million households of that use Section 8. And there's hundreds of thousands more that are waitlisted and hoping for a Section 8 spot to open up, but 3 million households on Section 8. And that could be a variety of makeups. It can be a family, it can be a single mom, it can be a single dad, it can be a single female, a single male, it could be a mother and a grandmother. There's just so many different variations of who can live in a Section 8 property, and it all matters about their income and their ability to qualify when their number is up. A report by the Public and Affordable Housing Research Corporation estimates that there's approximately 1.6 million families on public housing waiting and about 2.8 million families on housing choice voucher waiting lists. So it's pretty extreme. That's a lot of people. We're talking in excess of 4 million. And I think that a lot of people just don't realize how many homes are actually on Section 8 using vouchers. So that means if you're renting Section 8, you're likely to have high demand and low vacancy rates. And that's one of the great benefits of Section 8 and why I love it. Section 8 tenants on average stay in the program for about 6 years and often within their same rental for the entire period. And that type of consistency in a tenant is rare to find under any circumstance. We see our average tenancy around 30 to 36 months. Now, one thing to keep in mind about Section 8 rentals is that that tenant, if you're going to be following our 2 to 6 year model, might be the only tenant you have in that property for the duration of your ownership. So that creates a really passive feel, but also a lot of consistency and lack of vacancy and the expenses that come along with that. Tenants typically pay about 30% of the Section 8 program. The Housing Authority pays about 70%. Now, I have some tenants that pay nothing, so it just depends on their net adjusted income, and they look at it differently than the IRS. They look at different deductions, what they actually earned, and then they pay up to 30 to 40% of their net adjusted income. So that means typically you can count on rent to be paid without delinquency, despite the common perceptions of Section 8 housing. Now, one thing that you do want to keep in mind is that Section 8 tenants are on the program for a reason. So don't expect 800 credit scores, lots of people that have a lot of savings. That's not what we're talking about here. But of course, that is offset by the fact that the government pays the majority or all of the housing rent. Now, in times of economic downturn, demand for affordable housing tends to remain stable or can even increase. Generally, in economic downturns, rentals do even better. We saw that in the last crash when we had all that craziness after the predatory lending, and I'm not going to go too deep into that today, but we saw rentals actually go up, and that was because more people became renters, so there was a scarcity of supply, and supply and demand laws dictate that when that happens, rents go up. Now, we're in an interesting time right now because the number of people who rented homes back then compared to now, it's much higher now. We're at almost record low homeowner levels. And so what that means is you've got 50 to 60% of our population renting property, which means there's a huge need for houses, and not just houses to buy, but houses to live in for rent. And so that provides a level of stability for your investment, even during economic uncertainties. Now, some investors appreciate the opportunity to contribute by also providing affordable housing and making a positive impact in your community. Now, those of you who follow me know not only do I do Section 8, I also do second chance housing. So that means I work with people who have felony backgrounds, drug charge backgrounds, those types of things. And so it can really be a calling. It can be something that's important to you, or it can just be a financial decision. But regardless, it's not something that you have to do. Now, one thing that you want to keep in mind is anytime you're dealing with the government, you could be dealing with more paperwork, delays, and red tape. Anything with bureaucracy, that's what happens. But Section 8 also comes with a burdensome inspection process, and that can cost you money. There's going to be more on that later. But generally, anything they identify are things that you're going to want to fix anyway, as long as, of course, you're following our model about being a good landlord. Now, when it comes to rent pricing, one of the things that people don't understand is that once you have a tenant in a Section 8 property, you can still raise the rent in the future. You do what's called an increase request, and depending on whether or not the housing authority is allowing that, depends on whether or not they're going to approve that. So say that you have a 1-year lease, and in a year, the market rent's gone up $200. Most of the time, the housing authorities are allowing rent increase requests, and so you're going to submit the request, they're going to have you submit some comps, and as long as it meets the amount of the voucher and meets fair market, and they have the budget to do it, meaning that they're allowing rent increase requests, they're typically going to approve the rent increase. And I do these every single year, and it's a great process and really just not difficult at all, but it can take them 60 to 90 days to do that process. So you want to make sure you do it before the lease ends. You want to do it in advance 60 to 90 days. But that's no different than our typical rentals. We talk about the 2-month re-renting period all the time and that we want to approach tenants 3 months out. So this follows the normal process. It's just how you actually do the renewal varies a little bit. So you get approval from the housing authority. They're going to do their comparison study to validate the comp amount. And so it does add a little bit of time to the process, and also it can be a little bit burdensome. Now, keep in mind, as I mentioned, many tenants are living paycheck to paycheck on this program, and while rent is taken care of, sometimes they don't have as much money for repairs and maintenance. So, if you want them to clean their carpets because they're dirty, or maybe they're not mowing their lawn as much as everybody else, there are little things that can come up when you have a Section 8 rental. But they have the same requirements in the lease. We're using the same lease for them that you would use for a regular tenancy. There is something called a HAP agreement that goes over and above the lease with the tenant, but they still have the same responsibilities. So if you're doing Section 8 rentals, just make sure that you're doing more routine checks or hire a property manager who's already doing them. Now, there can also be market perception issues. When we started doing a Section 8 program in Collin County, we had a lot of pushback from people around the homes that we were doing, which it was really unfathomable to me at the time. I was new in the industry. I was, 18, 19, and I didn't understand the stigma that went along with Section 8 at that time. I mean, that's almost 20 years ago. So just keep in mind there might be a negative perception from other tenants or potential buyers who may avoid properties associated with Section 8 housing. But typically, we don't see a lot of this anymore, especially given how prevalent it is here. And investors generally love Section 8. People who have had homes on Section 8 tend to love it and prefer it, especially since you can often get a little bit more rent. Now, pros of Section 8 are the tenants normally stay a long time. The housing authority pays a portion or majority of the rent, which can help with delinquency and vacancy, and high demand to families who qualify for affordable housing programs. The negatives are the burdensome inspection process that can lead to lost money. Raising rent, of course, requires that rental increase request with local comparisons, and tenants are often living paycheck to paycheck, and that could potentially lead to a lack of maintenance. One other thing I will point out is in Section 8 tenancies, there's often going to be more occupants per bedroom than what you might otherwise see, and so sometimes that can cause a little bit more wear as well. Now, let's turn the Section 8 process into an 8-step process of how it works. So step one in this process is you're going to seek out tenants. And I do recommend you always go to gosection8.com to post any properties available for Section 8. You don't have to qualify the property prior to getting a tenant. This is an old misconception that you have to sign up or get approved or get inspected before you find a tenant. If you have a fully subsidized apartment property, that works differently. But for single family homes, single apartments, single condos, townhomes, things like that, there's no prerequisite. You can market it online to seek tenants, but there's no qualifying you or the home until you have an approved application. Then you're going to verify their voucher. Each Section 8 tenant is going to present you their housing voucher, and the amount of that voucher is going to be determined by the city, the county, or the zip code, depending on how each authority works. Dallas, for example, typically uses a zip code process, but others might go by county, especially in areas that are more rural. And once you verify that voucher, you're going to want to make sure you verify the rent charge does not exceed what is deemed fair market value or FMR, that the voucher qualifies for the number of bedrooms your property has, and the start date of the tenancy aligns with the voucher's timeline. Now, FMR works differently with every housing authority and different programs. So each housing authority uses a different percentage of fair market rent. Your rent may not exceed that allowed amount, but some housing authorities like Dallas Housing will exceed 100% of FMR on certain programs like the Walker Settlement Voucher. Now, when you look at the voucher amount, you're going to have things that are going to come out of there. Those are the deductions. So you're going to want to deduct the appliances you're not providing, the utilities you're not providing, and of course, make sure you start with the bedroom size that is on the chart that they provide you, because every single difference is going to make a difference to the net amount, and that is the amount that your rent cannot exceed. Once all of that checks out, then you're going to fill out the packet. The housing authority is going to give you a packet called an RFTA in which you're going to enter a lot of personal and confidential information. I recommend that you keep this packet and you go turn it in or have your property manager do it instead of allowing the tenant to do it. I see a lot of people who are individual landlords that self-manage where they'll give the packet to the tenant to go turn in, but this has your social security number, your bank account information. I do not recommend that. Now, the inspection process is what happens next, and this can be the most challenged part of the process. Just make sure you take note of the steps and make sure to document everything. First, the property has to be vacant during inspection. So if you are pre-renting this property following our protocol, one of the negatives that you might consider about Section 8 is that it has to be vacant before it can be inspected. So this can lead to an extended vacancy of up to 30 days. But keep in mind, often these tenants stay a very long time. Now, if you're a good landlord, and I know all of you listening are, no fixes are going to be necessary or minor fixes. However, note that that vacancy time can cost you money, and if they find small items, you will have to go fix those and then have a reinspection. That process is very quick. Where you're going to see a lot of issues is older homes where you have peeling exterior and interior paint that could have lead-based paint, where you have foundation issues where floors have shifted and you have trip hazards, where you have appliances that don't work, heat and AC that don't work. Those are kind of the big things we're talking about: mold, mildew, those types of things. Now, the next thing they're going to do is a market reasonableness study. And this is where the housing authority runs their comps. They just have a fancy name for it. And they're going to make sure that what you're asking is reasonable for the rent. Now, there's a lot of people that think that, oh, well, if the voucher's for $2,000, but my list price is $1,600, I can ask them to pay $2,000. So keep in mind, just because the voucher allows it, it doesn't mean they'll pay it. I see people who list a property for sale talking about how it has a, $2,000 a month Section 8 tenant in there, but I know the comps are really 1,600. And so then buyers will come in and pay based on what Section 8 is paying at that time. Just because someone skirted by and got by with getting more than market rent because someone didn't do their job right does not mean at renewal or when you go release that property, you're going to get that rent rate again. So if you are buying a property with a Section 8 tenant in place, make sure you verify rent comps. Don't assume what they are paying is what they would pay again, that they're not going to reduce it, and that you would be able to get that rent on a regular tenant in the future. Now, once you've gotten through the inspection process and the market reasonableness study, you're going to have the final agreement. So the housing authority is going to prepare and send you what's called a HAP agreement. And that is going to be the agreement that becomes an addendum to your lease. So the HAP agreement is between you and housing, the lease is between you and the tenant, and all together that creates your entire lease package. And once all of that is done, the tenant's going to pay their deposit and move in. Now, you might take the deposit at an earlier point in time, but the bottom line is before you let that tenant move in, you want to have their prorated rent portion and their deposit for move-in all in certified funds. And really from there, it becomes very much the process of an ordinary tenant. Now, you want to make sure you set up ACH or EFT payments from them. That way you aren't waiting on checks. They can be very slow to start paying, so don't be surprised if it's 45 days or even 60 days before you receive your first payment. But they will pay everything they owe up through that date and move forward. Now, one thing you want to make sure you understand is if you have a follow-up inspection, because they're going to come out, some housing authorities are more frequent, but generally it's every year or two. If they fail something and you don't fix it, and they fail it and they send you a notice of what's called an abatement and you still don't fix it, once that abatement date hits, rent stops until you fix it and it passes reinspection. That rent during an abatement period is never paid back. So make sure you are on top of any major repairs that get sent to you from the housing authority. Now, we have tips on best practices and making the process as hassle-free as possible if you are going to do this yourself. So there are a lot of things that you can really educate yourself on and keep up to date on. Those things are going to be making sure you understand the process and process changes, making sure you understand the eligibility changes, and of course, market changes. Every housing authority is different, though there are some major similarities. So if you're planning to operate outside of DFW, make sure you do your own research, and I always recommend using a property manager and consulting for extra help in your local area. Now, some housing authorities may require you to take training courses or get local licenses in order to do Section 8 housing. That's not really something we have here in DFW, but it certainly does happen in other states. So again, I want to remind you, the things that you want to make sure you are doing is making sure you're getting timely rent payments. You want to make sure that you understand the tenant is still going to owe timely rent payments. So if your tenant does not pay their portion, you can still evict them just like any other tenant. But that's very, very rare because they can lose their voucher if they're evicted. They generally will lose their voucher. And people wait years for this program. And this program transforms their life. And so typically your tenants are going to pay. Make sure you remember they're going to do those routine property inspections. Most of the time, it's every single year. You want to make sure you maintain good standing with the housing authority because that's going to help you with tenant relations and attracting tenants and support and resources. Now, again, if an issue is found during a routine inspection and not fixed, you will have an abatement issued and the rent will not be paid nor back rent paid until it is resolved. The screening process is something that you really are going to do about the same, but you need to understand, again, that most of these tenants are going to have, before their voucher, a poor rental history, maybe some negative references from landlords before the voucher, and potentially even complaints of lack of communication or repair, kind of fixing things that they caused or reporting repairs. So just keep in mind that these people didn't have a perfect financial history before they got housing. So don't go in thinking you're going to have a squeaky clean, perfect looking tenant. Now, the laws of the lease are something that you want to make sure you always understand. And I want to make sure anyone who does Section 8 reads a HAP agreement before they sign. So set yourself up for success by spending extra time during writing up the lease, especially the side that's going to be between you and the tenant if you're doing this yourself, so that fewer questions come up later with the tenants who are less equipped to handle certain situations. You want to make sure you have in there that proper notice is going to be given for housing authority access. And so repairs, inspections, and move in and move out dates need to be clear to the tenant. They need to understand them. Keep in mind that many of the tenants that you're going to see in Section 8 are having their first lease with you, and they only understand what they're taught in their little training that they get from the housing authority. So make sure they understand that you're going to be able to come in for repairs, that housing's going to come inspect, that if there's issues that are their responsibility that housing flags, that you're going to make sure that they go fix those, and that they understand the notice process for moving in and moving out. So documenting everything is something I always recommend, and it's especially important in Section 8 situations where the tenants may not be as keen documenters themselves. Often these people have not, again, done a property like this before, and they may not understand what all they need to keep, what they need to know, and how a residential lease works for a home. So just make sure you go over it with them. That little bit up front can help you in the long run. Now, one last thing I'm going to provide you is a Section 8 flow chart. So you can scan this QR code here, and that's going to be a flow chart you can take with you to follow for the steps to do Section 8 in the future. Now, again, I want to remind you, please make sure you're staying informed on upcoming events. We've got a great education season coming up for the end of this year in Q1 of 2025. And of course, you can always listen to us on your way to work, while you're working out, on any of our podcast channels. If you still have questions, you can always reach out by email, by phone, or by visiting our website. Thanks so much for watching. I hope everybody has a great weekend, and I'll see you guys soon.